So usually when starting a video, I like to come up with maybe a funny introduction or something pretty interesting about the product. But when I went to the product page for the PowerColor Hellhound Spectral White 7900 XTX, I found out that PowerColor had really done my work for me. Just take a listen to this.
Hellhound has long been guarding the gaming underworld and is committed to deliver the most reliable gaming experience. Remain simple and sleek, it is never humble in showing its strength when the gamers calls for.
What more can you say? Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and yes, that's right, today we are checking out the PowerColor RX 7900 XTX Hellhound Spectral White. I think dodgy marketing language aside, this is a beautiful all-white graphics card with a triple fan cooler, there's dual BIOS support, and it comes factory overclocked, so this card is definitely worth checking out. Now, it is currently priced at £1,049 here in the UK, although at the time of filming we are actually still in discussions with PowerColor about this, as they told us there's a possibility it might come down. Now, I'm actually going to be away next week when this review is likely to go up, so at the time of filming it hasn't been confirmed to us that the price will indeed be coming down. But if we do get confirmation of that, I'll be sure to maybe pop up a little text box in the video, or at the very least, leave a comment down in the description. With that out of the way though, let's take a look and see what this card is all about. Kicking off with a look at the design of the card then, clearly the focus is on the all-white aesthetic, from the shroud to the backplate and even the PCB. Now obviously this is personal preference, but I really like the look. I think it's just very clean, but it's also a lot more eye-catching than the usual plain black rectangular slabs that we usually get for review. Now, I can confirm that the shroud itself is made from plastic and not metal, which I was initially disappointed by, but on the other hand, it does still feel pretty solid in the hand, and I guess it also helps to keep the overall weight of the graphics card down. Speaking of weight, the Spectral White came in at just over 1.5 kilograms on my scale, so it is definitely a heavy graphics card, but it's also not quite as monstrous as some other RTX 4090 models that we've reviewed over the last 6 months. Likewise, it measures in at 320 by 118.5 by 62 millimeters, so it is definitely a big card, but it's also only a triple slot rather than some of the quad slot models that are becoming increasingly common, so I would say it's very large but not an absolute behemoth. PowerColor does also include a GPU support holder type thing in the box, which just helps take the weight of the card off from the PCIe slot. It is basic for sure, but it will definitely help. Fitted within the shroud then we find 3 fans, each with these translucent almost frosted fan blades, which fits nicely with the overall design theme. You'll notice that the outer 2 fans measure 100mm in diameter, while the central fan is slightly smaller at 90mm, and this one also spins in reverse, which is a common feature now on graphics cards, which helps just reduce overall turbulence of the airflow. As for the backplate as well then, this is made from metal and it's a full length design with just a few cutouts towards the end of the card which will help with heat dissipation. We can also see a few LED strips which surround the Hellhound logo, and there's more LEDs around each of the fan hubs. Now, speaking of the lighting, it's interesting here that PowerColor hasn't opted for RGB lighting. Instead, there's a physical switch on the card which lets you choose between either having white LEDs or blue LEDs. Now, personally, I think both of these modes look fine, but surely a software solution is going to be the answer here. I'm really not sure. Is anyone going to be that bothered that they're going to want to open up their case, reach in and flick a switch just to change between blue or white lighting? I'm also personally a little bit mystified that there's not RGB, as I think that would have complemented the design really well, but there we have it. Still on the topic of switches, there is another little toggle up near the I/O bracket, and this lets you choose between the OC and the silent BIOS. The OC BIOS does run a little bit faster with slightly higher fan speed, but we will go into detail about the differences between these two modes later in the review. Elsewhere, we can note two 8-pin power connectors, so PowerColor hasn't actually increased the number of power plugs over the reference design, while we do get a look at the standard set of display outputs, so that's one HDMI 2.1 and 3 DisplayPort 2.1. Moving on though to take a look at the PCB, PowerColor has opted for a design that looks very similar to AMD's reference. We're looking at a 17-phase VRM for the GPU and a 3-phase VRM for the memory, all using 70 amp monolithic power systems MP87997 MOSFETs. The GPU VRM is controlled by a monolithic MP2857 with an MP2856 controller handling the memory. And then for the cooler, this is a tidy bit of work with two aluminium fin stacks connected by 8 6mm heat pipes. The GPU makes contact with a plated copper base plate, and there's an extra plate on top of that which contacts the memory. Two smaller separate plates off to the sides are also used to handle the VRM cooling. Finally, we can also just confirm that PowerColor is not using any thermal pads on the back of the PCB to contact with the backplate. It's only a minor thing, but it can make a small difference. So that is it for our look at the card itself, and it's now time to move on to our testing. For this, we are using our regular GPU test system, which has been provided to us by PC Specialist. This is built around Intel's i9-3900KS, paired with the Gigabyte Z790 Gaming X AX motherboard, and we've also got 32GB of Corsair Dominator Platinum RGB DDR5 memory. Just before we do dive into the results then, it is worth pointing out that you may have seen our review of the Sapphire Nitro 7900 XTX. Unfortunately, we can't show the data in comparison from that review here today, purely because the Sapphire card was tested on our previous test system, so obviously it's not directly comparable, and unfortunately I no longer have that card to retest. Instead, in this video we're going to be focusing on comparing the Hellhound Spectral White up against the AMD reference design, where hopefully it's going to be a big improvement. Starting off with the thermal performance then. As we'd expect, the Spectral White's OC BIOS does run a bit cooler than the reference card, with the GPU sitting around 60 degrees and the hotspot, also known as the junction temperature, coming in at 79 Celsius. The silent BIOS runs 4 degrees hotter on both the GPU and hotspot metrics, with very similar results overall to AMD's reference card. The Spectral White then doesn't run massively cooler than AMD's own design, but the real benefit really comes in terms of noise levels. Here, the OC BIOS ran the fans at 42% or just 1200 RPM, producing 35 decibels of noise on my sound meter, which is already a huge reduction in noise against the reference card. Switch over to the silent BIOS, however, and the fan speed drops to 37%, a mere 1000 RPM speed, producing noise that measured in at just 33 decibels. Unfortunately though, I can report I did notice some coil whine on my sample. It was worse in the loading screens and the menus where the frame rates are typically uncapped, but it was also still noticeable during actual gameplay, so have a quick listen for yourself. Moving on then to noise-normalised thermals. For this we had to increase fan speed up to 53%, or about 1675 RPM, to hit 40 decibels. Unsurprisingly, this is where the Spectral White really shines against the reference card, with the GPU peaking at just 52 degrees and the hotspot hit 73 degrees, and that is actually a massive 16 degree reduction compared to AMD's own card. The Spectral White is clearly just a much more efficient cooler. As for power draw, here we are looking at power draw from just the graphics card measured using Nvidia's PCAP tool. As expected, we do see a slightly higher power draw from the OC BIOS, coming in at 372 watts in Cyberpunk 2077. That's about a 16 watt increase over stock, though the silent BIOS is dead level with the reference card, sitting just under 356 watts of power. GPU frequency is another key metric, and here it was actually pretty interesting to see that the Spectral White came in a fraction slower than AMD's reference card. Not by much admittedly, but over the 30-minute stress test, the OC BIOS on the Spectral White averaged 2514 MHz compared to 2555 MHz for the reference card. The silent BIOS is also a touch slower at 2490 MHz. These are admittedly very fine margins, we're only talking a couple of percent, but it is interesting behaviour nonetheless, as we would have expected the OC BIOS to run a touch faster. As for what this means for our real world game benchmarks, well, there's basically no difference between the two in terms of frame rates. In fact, over the 5 games I benchmarked, I didn't see a difference of more than a single frame, so the gaming experience is absolutely identical between the two. Now, this is exactly what we expect from an AIB card, but at the end of the day, a 7900 XTX performs like a 7900 XTX should, so we really have no complaints. Just don't expect big gains out of the box versus the reference card. We did, however, have a fair bit of success when it comes to overclocking the card. Now, for any 7900 XTX, undervolting is going to be key if you want to increase performance, and at 1060 millivolts, we were actually able to push the GPU clock up to 3000 MHz with the memory at 2750 MHz. This saw the real world clock speed increase up to 2853 MHz, so that's a 13% improvement over the stock frequency. As you can expect, couple that with the memory overclock, and we saw our frame rates improve by between 9 to 10% in the titles we retested, which really isn't bad at all. Admittedly, it's not a massive game changer, and the 7900 XTX will still be slower than the stock 4090 at 4K, but as overclocking goes on modern GPUs, this is a pretty decent result. The only downside is that power draw did increase further, now coming in at just under 437 watts, which is a 17% increase over stock. Overall then, I am coming away from this review with a positive impression of the PowerColor RX 7900 XTX Hellhound Spectral White. Clearly, the all-white aesthetic and the overall design is going to be a huge part of the overall appeal, but PowerColor has also built a very effective cooler. Its noise-normalised thermals are miles better than the AMD reference design, and if you just run it stock, out of the box, the noise levels are very, very low as well. I do, however, have a few quibbles with it, primarily the amount of coil whine that was present on my sample, which was a bit distracting, though it is important to note this can vary from sample to sample, and also your power supply can also play a part here. I'd also add that the lack of RGB lighting, instead only having a toggle between blue and white LEDs, to me seems like a wasted opportunity, but let me know your thoughts on that in the comments down below. At the end of the day though, it all comes down to pricing. As mentioned at the start of the video, we are currently still in discussions with PowerColor about this, as they told us there's a chance the price may come down in the coming weeks, but at the time of filming, I found it listed for £1,049 at eBuyer. Of course, the RTX 4080 is the key competition here, and with those GPUs now available at under £1,130, which you should choose really depends on your priorities. Generally, the 7900 XTX is equal, if not slightly faster than the 4080 in terms of rasterization performance at a slightly lower price. On the other hand, the 4080 has superior ray tracing performance, and it also has access to DLSS 2 and DLSS 3, while also being more efficient. With that in mind, if PowerColor can reduce the price down to say $999, then I think that would definitely help in its fight against the RTX 4080. As it is though, I am happy to recommend the PowerColor Hellhound Spectral. Why? It's a very solid card and it's definitely going to appeal if you're looking to build an all-white system in 2023. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this video. As always, I want to hear from you, so let me know your thoughts on this graphics card down in the comments below. You can also like and subscribe if you haven't already, and why not carry the conversation over on our Discord server, which is linked in the description. While there, you'll also find links to our brand new merch store, and if you're feeling particularly generous, you could even consider backing us on Patreon. That's it for this one though guys, I'm Dominic 4Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.